What does betrayal sound like? Sometimes, it's not a scream or a shout. Sometimes it's a whisper behind closed doors, a text message sent with trembling fingers, a phone call that sets deadly events in motion. And sometimes it's 5 deafening gunshots echoing across a quiet street, each one tearing apart a family forever. On a night that started like any other, Peter Michaels stepped outside to confront his sister and ended up with 5 bullets in his body. No one expected the trigger to be pulled by a family friend. No one imagined the mastermind could be his own blood. And no one believed the justice system would let the killers walk free. But that's exactly what happened. This isn't fiction. It's real, it's raw, and it's darker than you think. What really happened the night Peter was shot 5 times? Was it self-defense or something far more sinister? Stay with us, because the deeper we go, the more disturbing it gets. Welcome to True Crime Acts, where we look into the hidden truths behind some of the most chilling real-life events. Our mission is to uncover the stories that shock, educate, and spark change, reminding us that behind every headline is a victim, a family, and a ripple effect felt by an entire community. If you find this journey as important as we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to ensure you never miss another gripping exploration into the depths of human behavior. It was supposed to be an uneventful night, the kind where families sit in their living rooms winding down after a long day. But for Peter Martinez, this night would mark the end of life as he knew it. Just past midnight, a series of gunshots rang out, piercing the silence of the neighborhood. A frantic 911 call followed, the operator struggling to make sense of the hysterical voice on the other end. "He's been shot! He's on the ground! Please, hurry!" the caller pleaded. When first responders arrived at the scene, they found Peter collapsed on his front lawn, blood pooling beneath him. 5 gunshot wounds, each strategically placed, told the story of an execution rather than an act of self-defense. His breathing was shallow, his pulse weak. The paramedics fought to stabilize him as officers scoured the area for clues, but the real question lingered in the air like the smell of gunpowder. Who pulled the trigger? As detectives arrived, they pieced together the events leading up to the shooting. Witnesses recalled hearing heated voices earlier in the evening. At the center of the altercation was Peter's younger sister, Karen Michaels. Karen had arrived uninvited, already intoxicated, slurring her words and spewing accusations at her brother. Witnesses say Peter was agitated but composed, trying to de-escalate the situation. "Just go home, Karen," he had said, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed. But Karen wasn't one to let things go. After a few more jabs, insults, and a final threat, she left, muttering something under her breath. It seemed like the night would finally calm down, except an hour later she came back, with reinforcements. What had Karen done in that short window of time? Who did she call? After the initial heated argument between Peter and his sister Karen, it seemed like the worst had passed. But that sense of temporary calm would be shattered within the hour. Karen left Peter's residence visibly shaken, but she wasn't gone for good. And this time, she didn't return alone. In the passenger seat of her silver sedan sat Hank Michaels, her husband, who had a quiet but intimidating presence. And in the back seat was Jake Ferguson, an 18-year-old friend of the family, known for his volatility and fixation with firearms. Jake had always sought validation, eager to prove himself to the adults who praised him for his loyalty and toughness. What Karen told them in the car remains disputed, but based on witness accounts, her tone was urgent and her eyes burned with quiet fury. Something had shifted. She wasn't just upset, she was intent on resolution. Back at the house, Peter was standing on the porch, arms crossed, clearly agitated. He watched the sedan approach, not knowing it would be the last vehicle he would ever see. What followed was a blur, voices rose. Peter reportedly raised his hands in exasperation, shouting something that sounded like, "Just go!" before turning slightly, as if to step back inside. And then, gunfire tore through the night air, 5 rapid shots, one after another, each bullet striking Peter with a precision that only added to the horror. He collapsed to the ground, his blood pooling on the front step. Panic erupted. Neighbors screamed, someone called 911. Jake stood there, stunned, the gun still warm in his hands. Hank pulled him away. Karen stayed back momentarily, watching Peter's crumpled body, before following the others into the car. The shooter had vanished, The motive was murky, but the damage was irreversible. Was this truly a spontaneous act of violence, or had Karen returned with murder already on her mind? As detectives waded through witness testimonies, forensics, and surveillance footage, one name began to surface again and again: Jake Ferguson. At just 18 years old, Jake was no stranger to law enforcement. He had a reputation in the neighborhood for being quick-tempered and reckless, a ticking time bomb with a penchant for flaunting danger. Officers remembered him from earlier encounters: juvenile disturbances, unlawful possession of a weapon, and online posts glorifying violence. His social media was a red flag buffet: pictures with firearms, cryptic captions about loyalty and revenge, and hashtags that suggested a craving for notoriety. It wasn't long before forensic analysts confirmed that the bullets pulled from Peter's body matched a .45 caliber handgun, the same model registered to Jake's uncle but recently reported missing. And then came the tip that sealed it. An anonymous source claimed Jake had bragged about shutting someone up for good just hours before the shooting. But even with this damning information, there was still confusion about why Jake pulled the trigger. He told detectives during interrogation that Peter had charged at him and he had no choice. But his voice trembled. His story lacked coherence. And perhaps most telling, Karen Michaels and her husband Hank had also been arrested at the scene. Why would an 18-year-old with little connection to Peter become the triggerman in a family dispute? The deeper investigators looked, the more it appeared that Jake may have been the weapon, but someone else had loaded the bullet. Was Jake just another pawn in a much darker game orchestrated by someone with a personal vendetta? With Jake Ferguson in custody, the crime scene lab went into overdrive. Every scrap of evidence, every drop of blood, every footprint, every text message was meticulously analyzed. Ballistics matched the recovered bullets to the gun found hidden beneath the passenger seat of Jake's car. Traces of gunpowder residue were found on his hoodie sleeves and jeans. His fingerprints were on the weapon's grip. It was indisputable. Jake had fired the shots that nearly killed Peter. But there was something more damning. As detectives obtained a warrant for Karen Michaels' phone records, a sinister pattern emerged. In the hours leading up to the shooting, Karen had been exchanging rapid-fire text messages with Jake, and what they uncovered sent shivers down the spines of even seasoned officers. "He keeps pushing me. Handle it. Make sure he learns his lesson. This has to end tonight." Each message suggested far more than just a heated family disagreement. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was a roadmap to premeditated violence. And the tone of Karen's texts didn't read like someone trying to prevent conflict. Instead, she was escalating it, pouring gasoline on a fire that had already begun to rage. One message stood out above the rest. Sent just 30 minutes before the shooting, it read simply, "Don't chicken out. Do what we agreed." This text destroyed Karen's claim that she was unaware of Jake's intentions. She wasn't just a bystander. She was involved, emotionally and logistically, in what had become a pre-planned ambush. But still, Karen denied everything. "It was just venting," she said. "Jake took it too far. I never told him to shoot anyone," yet the evidence told a different story. Could a few text messages be enough to prove that Karen orchestrated the entire attack? Or would she find a way to convince a jury that Jake had acted on his own accord? When news of the arrests hit the community, it was like a bomb had detonated in the quiet suburb. Neighbors, friends, and even local church members were stunned. The Michaels were considered a typical, if sometimes dysfunctional family, not the type to be at the center of a near-fatal shooting. But now the town was buzzing. At the grocery store, at the gas station, in school parking lots, everyone was asking the same questions. What happened between Peter and Karen that was so serious it led to attempted murder? How did a family fight become a gunfire bloodbath? And why did Karen seem to walk the line between instigator and innocent so perfectly? Jake Ferguson was officially charged with attempted first-degree murder, unlawful use of a firearm, and criminal conspiracy. Karen and her husband Hank were charged as accessories before the fact, with prosecutors alleging they had conspired to threaten or intimidate Peter, and in doing so, created the conditions for the shooting to occur. Karen maintained her innocence in court. She claimed the texts were frustrated words, not orders, that Jake acted on his own, but prosecutors weren't buying it. They argued that Karen manipulated Jake, knowing full well that the volatile teen would do anything to prove himself. She had weaponized his rage, turned him into a human bullet, and aimed him straight at her brother. But what about Hank? His involvement seemed murkier. Though he was present during the confrontation, there was no physical evidence tying him to the gun or to the shooting itself. He claimed he was just trying to break up the fight, but his presence and his silence raised uncomfortable questions. As the town divided into camps, those who blamed Jake, those who blamed Karen, and those who thought the system would fail again, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about one gunman. This was about a conspiracy, cloaked in family loyalty and buried beneath layers of manipulation. And now, with trials looming and families torn apart, the only thing left to ask was, would the courtroom deliver true justice, or would another tragedy unfold in the form of a verdict? As the courtroom proceedings began, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Journalists lined the benches. Peter's grieving family sat front row, clutching photos of the man they had lost. Across the aisle sat Karen, expressionless, hair pulled back tightly. Jake looked down, his eyes avoiding contact. Hank stared blankly ahead. The prosecution came out strong. Their argument was clear. This was a premeditated killing, orchestrated by Karen Michaels and executed by Jake Ferguson, with Hank as an accessory. They presented texts from Karen to Jake, messages that hinted at manipulation and coercion. Phrases like "handle it" and "tonight changes everything" echoed through the courtroom like chilling mantras. Then came Jake's taped police interrogation. Played for the jury, it showed a nervous, emotionally overwhelmed teenager whispering, "Karen told me he needed to be dealt with. I didn't mean for it to go that far." Gasps filled the courtroom. The defense, however, didn't back down. They built a narrative around self-defense, insisting Peter had a history of aggression, that he had threatened Karen before, and had charged at Jake during the confrontation. They produced old police reports, minor altercations, arguments with neighbors, and one dismissed domestic disturbance call. Their goal wasn't to paint Peter as a villain, but to muddy the waters enough to establish reasonable doubt. As testimonies piled up and legal arguments twisted through emotional terrain, one thing became painfully clear. This case wasn't just about a shooting. It was about betrayal, manipulation, and a system struggling to separate truth from performance. Would the jury be swayed by a teenage shooter's remorse, or would they see through the lies that had cost a man his life? After 3 weeks of emotional testimony, the jury was handed the final instructions. They deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the energy in the room shifted. Not guilty of attempted murder. Karen Michaels, charges dropped, citing insufficient evidence for conspiracy. Hank Michaels, released, with no formal charges. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Peter's sister wept openly. His mother sobbed, leaning against the bench for support. On the defense table, Karen finally let out the breath she had been holding, her face remaining cold. Jake blinked several times, looking stunned. Hank nodded, expressionless. Outside, reporters swarmed. News anchors called it one of the most baffling acquittals in recent memory. Legal analysts pointed to the lack of direct video evidence, the ambiguity of the texts, and Jake's age as factors that swayed the jury. But to Peter's family, it was unthinkable. 5 bullets, 1 dead brother, no justice served. Was this justice, or just a clever exploitation of legal loopholes? In the weeks following the verdict, outrage rippled through the community. Peter's loved ones organized vigils and protests, holding signs that read, "Justice for Peter," and "Texts are not harmless." They circulated petitions to reopen the investigation and appealed to the district attorney to pursue civil charges. But the momentum of the trial had faded. The public's attention shifted, and the courts had spoken. Karen Michaels returned to her normal life, or at least the version of it that remained. Jake moved to another city, reportedly under the watchful eye of his parole officer. Hank went back to work quietly, avoiding reporters, but the pain never left Peter's family. His sister later told a local journalist, "The law might have let them go, but we know what happened. We know what they did." And the haunting question lingered, what if Peter had just stayed inside that night? Would he still be alive? Peter Michaels' death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It became a case study in how modern justice can falter when manipulation, influence, and fear cloud the facts. Karen played her cards masterfully. She never touched a weapon. She didn't pull the trigger. But she set the stage, lit the fuse, and watched the explosion from just far enough away. Her texts were indirect enough to cast doubt. Her demeanor controlled enough to avoid scrutiny. And Jake, he was the one who held the gun, fired the shots, and watched a man bleed out. Yet the courts gave him a second chance. Was this compassion for youth, or a dangerous precedent? Peter's story is a grim reminder of how family conflict, unchecked anger, and manipulation can become a recipe for deadly outcomes. It's also a wake-up call about the legal system, how evidence, context, and even performance can sway life and death decisions. How many more Peters will fall before we learn to see the warning signs, call out emotional manipulation, and demand accountability, even when the lines of guilt are blurred? Peter Michaels was gunned down just steps from his own front door by people he once trusted. And when the trial was over, no one was held accountable. 5 bullets, 1 dead man, 0 convictions. This isn't just a failure of justice. It's a tragedy that raises disturbing questions. How easily can manipulation mask as innocence? What happens when the system protects the cunning over the victim? And how many more families will be shattered before we demand real accountability? Peter's story isn't just a case file, it's a warning. If this episode left you shaken, don't let it fade into silence. Share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and let your voice be part of a growing movement that demands change. Because the truth should never be buried with the victim. This is True Crimex. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and never stop questioning what lies beneath the surface.